This is Secondaries Simplified, brought to you by Setter Capital. Hey guys, welcome to Secondaries Simplified, our mini-series where we take complex and basic topics of the secondary market and talk about them in small, digestible formats. Today, let's talk about the basic pricing mechanisms of a fund secondary. How does a buyer price it? When does it get transferred? All that fun jazz. So a secondary market price for a fund will typically be pegged to a particular record date. And at the end of the quarter, it's usually quarterly depending on each GP, but for the most part, it's quarterly. A buyer will then assign a discount or a premium to the net asset value as reported by the general partner. Now, some GPs will, report net of carry, sometimes will be gross of carry. So that's something that you want to pay attention to, is how is the carried interest reported on the cap account. But basically the price will be set as of that record date, and any post-record date calls or distributions will then be adjusted to that purchase price. Think of it this way. The buyer effectively owns the fund as of that record date commercially. We're not talking about legal ownership here, commercially. So any distributions that occur after that record date has been set technically are the property of the buyer. They're going to subtract that from their purchase price owed to the seller. Any capital calls, similarly, that occur after that post-record date will be added to the purchase price because the buyer in the transaction is taking over the remaining unfunded portion of the seller as stated in their capital account statement. Okay, so that adjustment happens all the way through until the closing date. The closing date is typically 1 or 2 quarters after that record date. Could be a year, sometimes if you're really using a stale record date, or if the general partner reports, let's say, only once a year. And on that closing date, that's the point in time where the general partner formally authorizes and effects the legal ownership change from the transferor to the transferee, i.e. from the seller to the buyer. At that point, after that point, the seller no longer has any ownership, obligation, etc., or representation of that fund as specified in particular, purchase and sale agreements in terms of reps and warranties, but we get into that later. And from that point, the buyer dialogues directly with the GP about receiving distributions, about funding the capital calls, etc. So the seller at that point is out of the picture. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful just to understand the very, very basic nuances of pricing a secondary deal, and we'll get into, more snippets on transfer restrictions, ROFRs, PTP, all that fun jazz that you want to be mindful of in executing a fund secondary on the next episodes of Secondary Simplified. Hope you guys stay tuned. Take care. Have a good day.